Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the Greater Boston Chamber for today's Transportation First event. I know most people in the room, but I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber, and we want to welcome you to today's event featuring the co-chairs of the Massachusetts Legislature's Joint Committee on Transportation. Here in Massachusetts, Senator Brendan Crighton and Representative Jim Arciero. At the Chamber, we continue to serve as the leading convener of the region's business community. And at today's event, it's another example of the powerful and influential leaders that we bring to our convenings that allow us to interact with policymakers that are directly impacting the conduct of business and commerce here in the Commonwealth. During today's program, we'll hear some thoughts first from Senator Crighton and then from Representative Arciero, and that will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by Carolyn Ryan from State Street. This is our final Transportation First event of 2025 throughout this year. This series brought together transportation leaders at the state and local levels for important conversations with the business community, and our focus has been statewide, not just Boston. Just to recap, during the course of this year, we've heard from General Manager and now Secretary of Transportation Phil Eng, Executive Director of Commuter Rail at the MBTA, Mike Muller, State Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver, Massachusetts Port Authority Chief Executive Officer and former Secretary of Transportation Rich Davey, the now departing City of Boston Chief of Streets Joshua Franklin Hodge, and the former Secretary of Transportation, Monica Tibbetts-Nutt. So it's been quite a series that we've had. Each one of those has generated a great deal of interest and activity, including amongst our local media. I advised our guests today that each of these events so far have resulted in some form of media coverage, so feel free to say whatever you want to say.
We're nuts.
I often remind people that transportation is more than about data and counting numbers of trips and mobility. Transportation is a deeply personal issue, personal to everyone, whether it's our daily commute time or the reliability of public transit, going to our events, doing our work. We're reminded that transportation deeply affects the quality of lives of our workers, our families, and our communities. Our Transportation First series is one of the ways, and we think innovative, that we are convening government and business leaders to help move us forward to strategies and solutions that will affect that deeply personal issue of transportation. We at the Chamber feel we urgently need to create a 21st century world-class transportation system in the Commonwealth. And this requires government leaders, policymakers, employers, residents to recognize transportation as the public good that it is. By putting transportation first, the entire Commonwealth be in a better position to solve other public policy issues, whether it's housing or climate change, which are common barriers to the region's growth and prosperity. As we get started, I want to thank our sponsor for the Transportation First event series, State Street. I especially want to extend a special thank you to Ron O'Hanley, CEO of State Street and former Chamber Board Chair, for his continued leadership in the area of transportation policy in the Commonwealth. With State Street's important partnership of this series, we've been able to make these events free and open to the public. So please join me in thanking State Street for their sponsorship of this event. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. First, you'll be hearing from Senator Brendan Crighton, co-chair of the Joint Committee on Transportation, who represents the 3rd Essex District in Massachusetts. For those that don't memorize the makeup of districts in Massachusetts, The Third Essex consists of the city of Lynn and the towns of Lynnfield, Marblehead, Nahant, Saugus, and Swampscott. In 2018, Senator Crighton began serving in the Massachusetts Senate. Before that, he served in the House of Representatives from 2015 to 2018, and he was a Lynn City Councilor for 6 years. Right after college, Brendan worked for State Senator Tom McGee, eventually serving as his chief of staff. So thank you, Senator Crighton, for being here today. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Representative Jim Arciero, co-chair of the Joint Committee on Transportation. Since 2009, Jim has been serving the 2nd Middlesex District in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. And if you didn't know the 3rd Essex District, I'm assuming you don't know the 2nd Middlesex District either. 2nd Middlesex consists of several precincts in the town of Chelmsford and the towns of Littleton and Westford. Previously, Representative Arciero served as House Chair of the Joint Committee on Housing. And if you think about that, during his chairmanship, and included work on the Affordable Homes Act of 2024, an historic $5 billion investment in housing. Throughout his legislative career, Representative Arciero has been an advocate for better schools, affordable housing, reliable transportation, and a healthier environment for future generations. Thank you, Representative Arciero, for joining us today. And our moderator today, we're getting the band back together again, is my friend Carolyn Ryan, Managing Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs for State Street. In Carolyn's role at State Street, she focuses on state and local public policy issues. Before joining State Street, Carolyn was the Senior Vice President of Policy here at the Chamber, where she led our public policy portfolio. Before Carolyn's time at the Chamber, she was a policy analyst at the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Senator Crighton, then we'll hear from Representative Arciero, and then we'll get into the conversation with Carolyn. Fine.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you to Jim, the entire Chamber team here. You guys have been such tremendous partners in transportation. You've always made it a priority, and we greatly appreciate that. I also appreciate the heads up that media's in the room. And with that, I have 2 takeaways I hope you all leave with today. 1, the Senate and the House have unconditional love for each other, as you'll see. And 2, we're not on vacation. This isn't a holiday break for us. We're working through it, despite what you may read in the newspapers. The legislature continues to work. We just may not vote in formal sessions. Thank you so much for having us here. Last but not least, for the Transportation First conference today. I haven't given a PowerPoint in about a decade, so bear with me there as well. But so excited to see so many folks in the room today. I've had the privilege of being in government, state government, for the last 20 years of my life. And I think almost everyone in this room I've interacted with in some way. I see my former colleague and former chair of transportation, Joe Boncory, Representative Sokolo's here, a bunch of Team McGee peppered throughout, and so many advocates for transportation. So thank you, all of you, so much. I've been great to work with my new chair, who's hit the ground running, Jim Arciero. So thank you there. And the Transportation Committee has hit the ground running this session, almost a year into it. We had passed our FY26 budget that made critical investments in our transportation infrastructure, a historic Chapter 90 bill, which you'll hear more about in a bit. And we held 12 hearings on nearly 400 bills. So all told, we've had a successful 2025. Very excited to finish this session strong under new rules, but to continue in 2026 as well. Today's topic is obviously the state of transportation. I can say in Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth, the state of transportation has greatly improved over the last few years and is only getting stronger as we continue to move forward. Obviously, we've had many challenges, particularly with some of the impacts and uncertainty from the federal level of government. But in Massachusetts, I think we're all committed to weathering the storm and staying on track. Now I'm going to try to do this correctly. All right. I wanted to just start by talking briefly about our most recent budget. The FY26 budget funded major transportation initiatives across the Commonwealth. This was made possible largely in part to higher than anticipated fair share revenues, which had allowed us allowed large expenditures that improve infrastructure and service in all communities. The budget appropriated $470 million for the MBTA, $573 million in funding for MassDOT, and $209 million to support RTAs. While this is the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, we recognize that this is really about the entire Commonwealth, and what impacts Western Mass or Central Mass certainly impacts our region here. And I think both the House and the Senate have shown their commitment to regional equity throughout our budget process. These represent significant increases in overall funding from just a few years ago. Since FY23, funding for MassDOT has increased by $115 million. Funding for the RTAs has increased by $112 million. And funding for the MBTA has more than doubled, increasing by $283 million. These investments would have been impossible without the new revenues from the fair share tax, and they've allowed for crucial improvements in services as well as our infrastructure. And along with just the increase in funding, we're trying to make these dollars go further, and I credit our partnership with the Haley Driscoll administration and certainly the secretaries as well as the general manager. We're doing this by directing fair share appropriations through the Commonwealth Transportation Fund rather than just allocating the funding directly. This simple accounting change will unlock up to $4 billion in additional bonding capacity over the next decade and make possible long-term capital investments that would have been far out of reach without this maneuver. With this high-level review complete, I want to take a moment to zoom in a bit to the funding levels for the MBTA. All told, in FY26, the legislature appropriated just over $1 billion for the T. There was $470 million in the annual state budget that I mentioned earlier, and there was an additional $535 million appropriated in the fair share supplemental budget. Including this funding is $300 million to replenish the MBTA budget reserve, $175 million in workforce and safety expenses to implement FTC recommendations, $40 million for physical infrastructure upgrades, and $20 million for the MBTA low income and eligible reduced fare program. That's been kicking around the legislature, obviously, for quite some time. I know the former chairman cared deeply about it, and I have to commend the T in this administration for putting that forward. For my district in particular, one that many folks can't afford to use the T. Unfortunately, this has been a lifeline. And I think they've done a great job getting the word out there. We recently put together some more money to try to make sure that everyone who is eligible is using this crucial program. This funding also supports the ongoing efforts to hire the necessary personnel and improve services across MBTA bus, ferry, rapid rail, and commuter rail services. I'd also just be remiss if I didn't talk about our long-term plans for transportation funding. I know this has been long been a priority of the chamber. Appreciate the work with you, Jim, and your team to get this over the finish. I actually think even, Joe, you got this passed at some point too. It's been a long effort to just take a deep dive and to be honest with each other about what the gaps are and what the need is for revenue. So we were a member of the Transportation Funding Task Force along with Jim. And back in January, we released our final report. This made it clear that we must find new sustainable sources of revenue to meet the rising prices and demand that faces our transportation system. Some of the deep dives we did there, I mean, it was a very long process, and I won't dive into all the details, but one thing that always stands out that I don't think gets talked about enough is that how drastically the sales tax has underperformed since forward funding was implemented 20 years ago. The revenue growth at the time was estimated to be 6 to 8%, but in reality, just averaged 2%. So, you know, a lot of people look to reform before revenue and all that, but I think we got the revenue estimates wrong initially, which has really hamstrung the T over the last 20 years. When you factor in the hopefully declining gas tax revenues as we turn more to EV vehicles, it's clear that we must find a more sustainable transportation funding force and to modernize how we finance transportation. Lastly, the Transportation Funding Task Force recommended we meet our current transportation funding needs by stabilizing the immediate finances of the transportation agencies, which we've made steps with this past year, but then moving on to enhancing existing revenue streams and to transform our funding system to establish more equitable and sustainable revenue sources in the long run. So certainly must consider all of these options. And from my view, and I don't speak for the Senate, this is just for myself here, but I think all options and everything should be on the table now as we continue to have this conversation around revenues. I just wanted to dive briefly into some additional capital projects here. All of this funding is enabling excellent work done by our colleagues in the administration. I know you had Phil Lang here earlier. He's been a tremendous partner, has made great strides to improving service for ridership, as well as obviously meeting the goals we needed to meet some of the requirements from the FTA. I won't revisit that whole history. It's behind us now, but that's not an easy job to meet those goals while at the same time continuing to keep our service running the best possible way for our riders. Through the track improvement plan, the MBTA has been brought up to 80% of good repair by laying out new rail, eliminating slow zones, and bringing planning and engineering talent in-house. And just last month, the MBTA provided an update on several capital projects that are in progress now, including upgrades to bus facilities to support new battery electric buses, procurement of newer, cleaner, and more reliable commuter rail locomotives, providing necessary improvements to our existing green light infrastructure, and designing and constructing a new layover facility for electric trains that are being introduced on the Fairmont line. This was all made possible by the FY26 CCF bonding capacity strategy that I spoke about before, and allows the MBTA to move forward on high-cost, long-term investments that would not have happened otherwise. Obviously, everyone here is familiar with some of the mega infrastructure projects we have, the I-90 Alston Multimodal, the North Station Drawbridge, as well as the Cape Cod bridges. I say these because I'd be remiss if we didn't recognize that these aren't luxuries. These aren't nice things to have. These are crucial and vital pieces of infrastructure to maintain our statewide network. Obviously, we face a number of challenges from the federal government, but I think we as a legislature and administration are committed to moving forward with these projects. There's really no alternative. I also just wanted to briefly touch upon some of the transportation initiative. I think we're going to talk more about this during question and answer, but certainly the electrification or transformation into regional rail of our commuter rail. We've made a great deal of progress with the Fairmont line coming from Lynn on the environmental justice corridor, also voted in as part of phase one. We hope to be next in line. And I think we also need to continue to look at ways to reduce the cost of this 400 miles of commuter rail. It's obviously not going to happen overnight, but I think prioritizing these lines and looking at ways that we can cut costs through permitting reform is something I think we're interested in the legislature. Outside of rail for a bit, on automated enforcement, it was great to partner with the House last year to dive into some ways that we can create safer roads for all users. So I'm sure folks are familiar with school buses. We allowed for automated enforcement through camera technology there, as well as for MBTA buses, both in the lanes as well as stopped. I don't say this lightly, but these policies will save lives. They will change driving behavior and will create much better access for folks with disabilities for our buses and provide, again, much safer option for families. And I think we have an opportunity to build off of that. Obviously, it's a sensitive topic when you talk about automated enforcement. There are a number of areas we need to get right. But if we look at how driver behavior has changed since the pandemic and how more regular and more severe accidents are happening all the time, obviously, we all want to change that. And I think automated enforcement is one thing we should be looking at. I have to give a shout out to Senator Brownsberger, who's been leading on this. Then just real quickly, because I'm talking way too long here, the ferry system under this administration has expanded greatly. And it's something Sherry and T. McGee know for a while. We've been hearing about this for 20 years. We've historically had a ferry system here in the Commonwealth, but we've nowhere gone to the extent that countries across the world have in utilizing just a tremendous opportunity to use these right-of-ways to connect folks, obviously economic development that comes with it, and just increase mobility. So shout out to the Haley Driscoll administration for expanding service up and down our coast. And they're undergoing a study now and a task force to even expand that further as well. Then on micromobility, we're going to talk a bit more about that with Jim in a bit, but we're proud to be on the Special Commission on Micromobility. These are the scooters, the e-bikes, the mopeds, the strange devices that look like out of a science fiction movie that are flying around you all day long, creating really unsafe conditions. So we're excited to have recommendations soon, and we'll talk more on that in a bit. And then lastly, you can't say transportation without talking about housing in the housing crisis we face here in the Commonwealth, along with affordability. And obviously, we believe, and I think the legislature has taken action to show that transit-oriented development is a great way help solve this problem. Obviously, no silver bullet, but certainly they are very connected. So thank you so much again for the opportunity. Look forward to hearing from Jim, and then the discussion always is the most valuable part of this. So we appreciate all of you coming out here. And Jim, thank you for inviting us to speak here. Yeah. With that, I'll welcome up my good friend and co-chair, Jim Arciero.
Thank you. Great job. Forgive me for putting my water here. I was getting over a little bit of a cold. I tend to get a little more dehydrated. Thank you. It is wonderful to be here today. Thank you to Jim Rooney and the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce for the opportunity today for the Transportation First Forum. I'm Jim Arciero. I'm the House Chair for the Joint Committee on Transportation, joining my good friend that we go back about 22 years or so working together in the Senate, and worked in Senate Ways and Means for Senator Pangiatakis and, of course, Senator McGee. But as the senator noted, I'm coming from the housing space originally, having spent the past 2 sessions as the housing chair, where last summer we passed the Affordable Homes Act, which was a $5.2 billion investment, the largest in state history in housing production, with 49 policy provisions that are associated with that. But I'm thrilled to be here today. As the new chair on the House side of the Transportation Committee, I'm able to view the intersection, if you will, no pun intended, of life's fundamentals, housing, transportation, education, and economic development from a sort of a different angle. Without safe, reliable transportation, whether roads, rails, ferries, bikes, or scooters, will qualified job applicants may be unable to access employment without opportunities to get to work. Massachusetts is an older state with aging infrastructure, so it can be a challenge to keep up. But the cost of doing nothing is far too great to bear. The legislature wants to direct funding where it's needed in a responsible fiscal manner. It's about giving Boston, our communities across the state, and state transportation providers the resources and funding they need to get the job done, and to get residents the means to get where they need to go. Now, let me work on this. Unlike Brendan, I did a PowerPoint recently, but there we go. But I didn't know it was going to work. The governor has a multi-billion-dollar transportation plan built from recommendations of the Transportation Funding Task Force and the Chapter 90 Advisory Board. It's a multi-year plan. We're looking at that currently and have to put into motion some of its main components. One involves increasing the state's bonding capacity for capital projects. In FY26 budget, the legislature approved an annual amount of $550 million in fair share surtax to be dedicated to the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. This annual dedication will improve the Commonwealth's bonding capacity by about $4 billion. We expect to utilize the additional bonding capacity for capital projects in the future transportation bond bill, which is part of the plan, and we'll talk about the transportation plan. The administration has indicated to me that most likely that capital bond bill will be next legislative session. Second, the legislature approved $716 million in funding for transportation raised from the fair share surtax revenue. In a sup. With chaos in Washington going on, the Commonwealth is better prepared to weather federal fiscal uncertainty because of the fair share surtax, which is independent of federal funding, which allows us to be shielded with our valuable projects from uncertainty in the federal level. The $716 million will help replenish the MBTA's depleted cash reserves, invest $20 million in funding for low-income fares, invest $25 million for regional transit authorities and capital improvements, and an additional $80 million in funding for the Chapter 90 program, which is for our roads and bridges locally across the Commonwealth. Third, the legislature increased the amount of funding going to all 351 municipalities with the passage of the Chapter 90 bill. This $1.2 billion package represents a 50% increase over previous funding levels. The bill invests $300 million to the Chapter 90 program, with $200 million distributed by the traditional formula of road mileage, population, and employment, and an additional $100 million dedicated solely for road mileage to better support our rural communities that are lacking those other two very important figures of population and employers. The Chapter 90 bill also includes $885 million for 3 additional programs, $500 million for repairing state-controlled road and bridges that are in poor condition, $200 million for local culvert replacement and repair, and $185 million for various capital improvements to reduce traffic congestion, intersection improvements, shared use paths, and sidewalk improvements as well. Now, building off of Senator Crichton's remarks, sometimes we think about transportation as separated by mode rather than one larger multimodal system. When one mode receives investment, it benefits the entire system. For example, when the T and the regional rail work well, you reduce congestion and traffic by taking more cars off the road. It's not enough to provide a service. We need to provide a service that works and responds to the needs of the people that use it. Schedule coordination between the T and RTAs is important to ensure that riders can make their connections quickly and seamlessly. Did that change? Okay. All right. Okay. As part of my responsibilities as House Chair, I want to be sure that our members have a solid sense of transportation needs across the entire state. To that end, I've been touring around the state to member districts. My goal is to hit every RTA across the state. We've got 7 in the books. We got 8 more to go, to hear firsthand the challenges, the opportunities we're facing. I look at it this way too. When I took on the chairmanship of housing 4 years ago, or almost 5 years ago, I didn't have a tremendous amount of background in it. But what I learned was by going across the state, seeing the stakeholders, the people that are doing the work every day, it gave me a keen understanding of the needs and how to move forward with that. My great friend and co-chair has a couple of years on me on that with chairmanship here, but that has been beneficial, obviously, with our working relationship, but also looking at the work that people are doing across the state. The job they do for the need they fill is no less important than the T. RTAs provide the crucial connections for riders to attend medical appointments, visit friends and relatives, and do their shopping for their families. In the FY26 budget, the legislature provided $35 million in fair share revenue to fund fare-free RTA service to ensure that riders have the means to get where they need to go with one less concern about already tight budgets. This was part of the $209 million operating transfer from the CTF to help fund RTA needs, in addition to the $50 million from the surtax for capital improvements and workforce and training initiatives. We're also exploring new transportation service models for residents in less dense areas that lack fixed route services. The legislature is also looking into legislation to form a commission to study the use of microtransit. Microtransit is a non-fixed use transportation ride service provided by individuals in lower density areas. It uses smaller vehicles, such as shuttles or vans, operating on demand style system with flexible routes based on passenger demand within a service area. Microtransit, therefore, is a potential tool to address first mile, last mile connectivity issues. The House side of Transportation Committee reported a bill to set up a microtransit commission favorably out of committee in October. As Senator Crichton mentioned, he and I are serving on the Micromobility Commission. We're looking at necessary safety measures to get our arms around clarity around definitions and classifications. Those recommendations should come out in a report in January, and we look towards working together to get something on the books this legislative session. In closing, we've made a substantial increase in funding for our local roads and bridges. with an eye toward making sure our transportation system works for you, no matter what part of the state you reside in, or even outside of it for our Rhode Island and New Hampshire employees and visitors. We are starting to see the benefits of a revitalized transportation system, and I'm confident we'll see those investments pay real dividends in the near future. It's an exciting time to be involved in building our transportation system, and I'm sure that we, as a legislature, city, and state, will more than meet the moment. Thank you.
Is it on? Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Again, I'm Carolyn Ryan here on behalf of State Street. I want to say also hello to our virtual attendees. Be thinking about your questions. We're going to open up some time later on for everybody. But just to open up, I did want to say one of the things I appreciated that you both did was you talked about the impact of transportation on people's lives. And this is part of why State Street sponsored Transportation First. We view it as a vital solution to so many of our public policy problems. And it is a workforce competitiveness issue. I was looking at the questions earlier this week, and I take the commuter rail, and I was on a line that had 2 broken down trains, and one didn't show up for over an hour. So I had to drive in. I was getting salty as I was developing these questions, but this won't hurt a bit.
We have some folks in fields. Yeah.
But fortunately, it was on time this morning, so everybody is safe. In any case, but let's jump in. You know, you're both coming, sounds like north and northwest of Boston. Tell us what your commutes are like. Let us relate to you.
Yeah, so my district is the towns of Chelmsford, Littleton, Westford. I'm from Westford. I grew up in that area. It's about 35 miles from Boston. We're in the sort of greater Lowell Metro West region. I always like my district kind of lies in between there. So most days I drive into the State House and my commute in. It's usually about flexibility with me. My district is interesting. In the last 20 years, we were one of the fastest growing high-tech regions anywhere in the Commonwealth, home to IBM's largest software lab in North America, which was 2,700 employees, NetScout, Puma's headquarters before they moved to Cambridge. But we saw a lot of change during the pandemic, and that is the post-pandemic economy. I would always say my district, from the 110 corridor, from Littleton through to Chelmsford, was kind of mirroring a mini 128 district, if you will. I've been around long enough, I'm in my 9th term, but in my freshman year, it was the subprime mortgage. And so during that period of time, unemployment was like around 9% or so. And we were cutting ribbons and getting more money, leveraging more money from the federal and state from federal and state government opportunities because we were growing a workforce at that period of time. The pandemic came, all those businesses, a lot of them closed up and became remote. So my district really, in a lot of ways, is kind of unique in the sense that a lot of the workforce is tech. A lot of the workforce or people that reside in my town are working in the sort of tech region, either 128 or the Bedford area. And the difference or the switch on things is that we have a lot of open office space and a lot of people who work remote. So when it comes to commuting, on my commute and typical commuting, it's more about frequency and convenience because the traditional commute is just not the same for us. And as legislators, we definitely don't traditionally commute. And we always have to, I have a young family, Brendan has a young family, so we're certainly always have to, I usually need my car quite a bit to do school pickup.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to the chair. It is kind of difficult to organize our commuting schedules around our kids' sports and pickups and all that. But I've lived in Lynn my entire life. It's just 12 miles north of Boston, and I've worked at the State House my entire adult life. And during that time, my commutes changed considerably. When I first started, I didn't have a car. And you would think, well, Lynn is a commuter rail station. Maybe that could be your mode in. But at the time, it was unaffordable. I mean, it's $7 for a one-way trip. you don't factor in parking, you don't factor in transfers. So I would have my grandfather pick me up, another car on the road to drive me to Revere and Wonderland, and I would take the Blue Line. I mean, Blue Line for the first 10 years of my life before, or maybe 6 or 7 before getting a parking spot. But the commuter rail's right there. You would think that it would be an easy model. Over time, I moved closer to the commuter rail. I was able to use it here and there. Kids have complicated things greatly. We're lucky to have a ferry service as well, which is amazing. And we've, seen ridership just soar the last couple of years there, not only during the weekday, but weekends. So that's a tremendous option there. But yeah, right now it's kind of hard. We get drop off and pick up. So I hate to admit that I take my car in most days. Yeah.
We're not judging
Yeah.
you for driving.
Okay.
So you're uniquely positioned in that you have constituents, and I would imagine they let you know their thoughts on transportation. What do you hear from them? And is it positive? Is it negative? Where are the pain points? Where are the positive feedback?
I mean, I will say, why isn't the Blue Line come to Lynn? It's been 100 years of talking about it. We've since, as I referenced earlier, kind of shifted our focus to the existing right of way that we have along our commuter rail, recognizing that commuter rail is kind of serving an outdated model as well as outdated infrastructure, and looking, no offense to the folks here that have operations there, but certainly increasing frequency, lowering the costs, and getting more stations where they belong could help fill that gap that the Blue Line, unfortunately, just over time, it's not as feasible as an option. So we're excited to continue to make progress here. That's the number one thing. The number two thing is we love the ferry. We want more service, more trips.
I would say for my district, the workforce that resides in my district is in some ways non-traditional in how they get back and forth to work. A lot of the folks work remote, so a lot of that sort of interaction or utilization of public transportation is typically circumstantial. And so very oftentimes in my area, we do have the traditional commuters. We have the Billerica, which serves like my Chelmsford region, Littleton train station, which myself and Senator Eldridge represent that area. And over the last 10 years, we've provided a brand new station. We've expanded parking, and it's been very valuable regionally, not just in Littleton. So those options are there. But again, I feel that my constituents in my area are looking to more frequency and flexibility when it comes to going to a Boston or something such as that, because they often don't travel to Boston on a regular basis.
All right. So it seems like reliability, frequency, cost are the common themes. So, one of the questions we have is, what do you view as the legislature's role in transportation policy and transportation funding? Well, you have an obvious role in funding, but how do you approach it? And related to that, like, who oversees the success of our transportation system? What are the forums where there's some accountability for performance, or you have riders or drivers that have ideas, frustrations, whatever it may be? Where are the forums that those get discussed?
Okay, well, I'll start, I guess. Well, I'd say first with what are the forums to discuss our roles as legislators? I think one, of course, is funding, right? That's when you said we already know that exactly, but funding and certainly prioritizing funding. We always have to work with our colleagues specifically on larger sort of goals that are not just regional, but also take into consideration region. As chairs of the Joint Committee on Transportation, we have over 300 bills that are come before our committee, over 13 hearings, I think, something around that. 12, 30 hearings that we've had, over that period of time. So that's our role too. When it comes to forums, et cetera, well, there's at every level there is forums within state, local offices that certainly we always have accountability. We always have projects that the MBTA and local projects, DOT, always have that opportunity to hear from folks that it benefits or that it's going to be affecting. So there are I would say a multitude of opportunities to hear from citizens about transportation improvement plans.
Yeah, I agree with Chair Arciero. I think one of our roles as legislators, in particular with the committee, obviously is the policy end of things. And during our presentations, we kind of talked higher level, 30,000 foot view. But if you zoom into the ground level, where we have a tremendous workforce across the Commonwealth, whether through the T, the MBTA, MassDOT, these are folks every day going out there on very difficult jobs, very difficult circumstances in getting the system to run, right? So recently, we've rolled up our sleeves as a committee, and the House and Senate have led at different times in different ways, but making sure that those workers are protected. So, and this wasn't even before our committee, but we played as big assist role we could in terms of making sure that our transit workers are protected from violence that we've seen increase over time. So we're working through that as a legislature, certainly the move over law to try to protect folks that are doing the crucial work out on our highways. So, it takes a lot to get the system to run efficiently, and these are thankless jobs, and we're trying to support that workforce, as well as just the funding to hire. Like, you remember when the FTA came in, it was you weren't meeting all these different thresholds, and it's not easy to put forward that much revenue, but, it worked, and now we have a much higher level of workforce and hopefully more attractive jobs to continue that recruitment. And then just in terms of, to build off Jim's answer, there are a number of different agencies and entities, many represented here. I mean, the MBTA Advisory Board, certainly the MBTA Board of Directors, chaired by our boss, Tom McGee. At the local level, certainly, we have local projects. They're interacting directly. We're going through a number in Lynn right now. It's not an easy process, but I think there's a level of accountability there. We could always do better as state government and as legislators, but there are systems in place to hold people accountable.
To add to that as well, I would say that the various commissions, we're both sitting on the Micromobility Commission right now, certainly taking stakeholders, vulnerable users, folks that are in the public safety space. We're going to see very soon a Microtransit Commission moving down the pike as well. That's taking a lot of different folks, especially in rural communities, to have representation, but representation from hospitals, representation from employers from rural areas to sort of work together. So there's been, again, a multitude of sort of opportunities to have stakeholders and to be heard.
Let's pick up on the funding piece. There was you both mentioned the surtax, the millionaire's tax. The chamber, I think, over the years has been an advocate for 50% of it going to transportation. The legislature has skewed more towards education in the last couple of years. Can you talk a little bit about how people can advocate, or what they can do to try or what would it take to convince the legislature to make it a 50-50 split?
Okay. Well, first, I would say, as a former legislative director at Senate Ways and Means, budget writers like flexibility. I will say that. I will say that if you look at the transportation plan, and you look at the Transportation Funding Task Force recommendations, you look at the initial closeout, there was more monies set aside for transportation there. Of course, when it comes to the budget portion, more money towards education. Then we were able, as part of the transportation plan, to come up with investments in Chapter 90, and then, of course, a capital plan. But I think ultimately, to be a straight shooter, I think typically budget writers like flexibility, and I'll say why. One is coming out of the pandemic, the Student Opportunities Act, and looking especially at inflation that has affected 351 cities and towns across the Commonwealth, and special education cost. There is specific scenarios or specific events in which we have to be ready to have that money for crises. And I think in particular, budget writers look at those opportunities to be flexible.
Yeah, I agree. It can be complicated. I understand it's straightforward when you say 50-50 split. We have 200 legislators, obviously 351 cities and towns, and a lot of need out there in both spaces. I'm a transportation guy, but it's hard as a legislator or to be anybody not care very much about our education system. So it's been hard. We're going to continue to advocate for getting closer to a 50-50 split. I think there's a great story to tell about the money being put to good use and getting results. So I think continuing to, and I appreciate the chamber leading in this regard, to continue to tell that story so we show that this investment was worth it, that we are putting it forward, and that it is yielding results. We'll continue to advocate for that, but obviously a lot of good funding going towards education is a good thing overall as well.
I want to pick up on something you said, because you were talking about crises. Is transportation not viewed as in crisis state yet?
It absolutely is. So is housing. There's a number of obviously policy spaces that are in a crisis, but I would say my view as a former Senate Ways and Means staffer is certainly flexibility, and there are unforeseen circumstances that arise, and typically legislatures do not want to be handcuffed in any which way.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I think we've, I think we've stabilized for the near future. In the near future, I mean, the next, year or two. So it's certainly if it's not considered, whatever qualifies as a crisis, not a crisis now, we're at least at a point where we can take a deep breath and see how we can strategize to help, stabilize it longer term and to kind of enhance the system overall. And it's really, really hard right now when you're chasing all these crises all over the place and trying to prioritize which is which again, I think the housing piece is probably top of mind for most legislators at this point.
But if you look at the transportation plan as a whole, and the governor's transportation plan is an $8 billion plan over 10 years, right? It started with the closeout revenues from the surtax, investments in the surtax, and then paying $550 million into the transportation fund to allow us to bond $4 billion more. So this entire process, moving to a bond bill, which has been projected at possibly $5 billion, that is all protected from disruptions on the federal level. So we were able to make these investments and sort of avoid some other affordability issues in education as well. But understandably so, I think that's the flexibility piece.
So on the 4 billion, that's for, I think everybody here probably knows, but a bond bill is for projects. What are the projects that you would prioritize with that bond bill? And they told me to ask that.
Brendan?
Hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm kidding.
No, I think, for me, the electrification of rail is a no-brainer, and it hits, I think, all the areas that we really, as a Commonwealth, have prioritized. When you think about the housing crisis, when you think about climate, public health, it's just we're operating with these diesel, and again, no offense, folks in the room, who want these changes. We're operating with this outdated technology that's harming our communities. As I mentioned, the city of Lynn, you have a commuter rail that runs through in the backyards of homes, right? And these are going through backyards of people that will never ride the commuter rail because they can't afford to ride the commuter rail. In Lynn, the frequency is not there. Salem State University and North Shore Community College, they're both on the commuter rail line. Salem State doesn't have a stop, yet the vast majority of Salem State students are from Lynn. Wouldn't it be great if they could, and they also exchange curriculum a bit. So like you could have that connectivity there just with a stop with greater frequency. Remarkably, there's no connection at Wonderland in Revere. So instead of my grandfather having to drive me, if you needed to get to the Blue Line, you could hop on a commuter rail with a short walk over, a protected walk as we envisioned. All that comes with regional rail and electrification. Not that I'm promoting gambling by any means, but Encore doesn't have a commuter rail stop. You could reach outside of the car and like touch Encore. It's right there. For the workers that work there, many from Revere, Chelsea, and surrounding areas. So our car to certainly make sense. 400 miles is, extremely expensive, and obviously it's going to take time. I'm excited to look at battery electric, the potential there. We'll see how Fairmont plays out, but the environmental justice corridor absolutely needs to be completed, whether battery electric or traditional catenary, and we'll see a ton of benefits across all sectors. Sorry to give a long answer. This is my plug.
I think he's the happiest guy you gave a long answer.
That was great. But there's a multitude really of projects that that we have to have and sort of manage the interest of legislators as well, right? And within the communities that they represent. So when you ask, like, we're able to bond more, certainly, but we're also able to bond without that federal interruption, and that is something that's really important here. And again, the multitude of projects in the MBTA, RTAs have capital projects they have to work on as well. So there's a multitude of work to be done.
Well, so let's pull out and do the statewide perspective. You mentioned, Chair Arciero, that you've gone to, I think you said 7 of the 15 or 9 of the 15. What are some of the interesting things you've seen? RTAs, I think to some degree are almost like pilots. They can test things out and see what works well and what, where a pain point is for some of the bigger RTAs and for the T. What's some of the things you've learned
Yeah,
in those
what I've
visits?
heard was really about is how important these are for, you so often we don't really think about the individuals that don't have access at all to transportation and don't have a car and have to really rely on RTAs to do everything, get, appointments for school, after school rather, certainly for, doctor's visits. There's so many things that have to, happen. And I think that's a big part of, individuals that rely on RTAs really certainly need that sort of opportunity not to have to spend additional money on it because it's something that individuals rely on, and when they do, it's really about getting them to point A from point B.
Just to build off the chair's answer, back when I think I first started on the transportation committee, our vice chair, Paul Mark, invited me out to his district. And I've been complaining about our transportation access on the North Shore for my entire life. And I go out there and they really have something in place. They don't have access. Like there is no alternative to having a car. And even if you bring up, ride share, they don't have that cab service. No. So you're really just stuck where you are. And I think, the committee certainly over time is really focused, while people think of me as a T guy just because I'm in the service area, that the regional equity piece is so crucial. And all of our colleagues in the House and the Senate, they don't let up, and we appreciate their relentlessness, whether it's on East-West Rail or on when we're talking about Chapter 90. I mean, without their advocacy, I don't think we made the change a few years ago to really factor in the road miles and remove some of the other parts of the Chapter 90 formula that really were outdated and not serving the entire Commonwealth. So you saw the legislature act, and then we appreciate the administration kind of further, pushing forward some of those reforms we made and showing that the concept works. So I think without their advocacy and without them having a seat at the table, it could be more, urban and dense area centric where, we need to serve the entire Commonwealth and keep that connectivity.
And we also look at the point of microtransit, which we talked about, and this commission that we anticipate will pass this year and work towards recommendations. And that is just like so many rural communities throughout the Commonwealth. Folks are very isolated and don't have that access. And I talked before about using the usage of RTAs is certainly to get to medical appointments and after school visits and basketball practice and things as such. But the microtransit piece is huge because people are so isolated in so many of the rural communities that we have in the Commonwealth. And, that's going to be a big step towards getting recommendations to, facilitate that.
So on the microtransit piece, can you give us a preview of what we might see or what?
Well,
what they're looking at?
a lot of the issues are to get recommendations. Really, it's small sort of van service for individuals on demand time when they live in sort of isolated areas throughout rural communities. We're looking at connections with employers, connections with hospitals, meds and eds will be part of that as well, having that conversation. So a lot of course, rural community folks, legislators that are interested in this, a lot of them certainly are from Western Mass. But I'll tell you, I was at a planning meeting the other day for NIMCOG, which is up my way, Northern Middlesex Council on Governments. And we talked a little bit about the Chapter 90 bill. And first, of course, the road miles piece. And someone stood up who was a town manager in Dunstable, which is like 8 miles from, or so 10 miles maybe from Westford where I live. And he said, look, I represent a rural community, which I guess I didn't really think of it as such. And Chapter 90 and microtransit issues are huge to him. And that's 40 minutes from here. So it's an interesting concept. And I think it's going to affect more individuals and more communities than we think.
I don't have much to add other than that last mile piece is just crucial. Like if we want people to get out of their cars and get on a public transit, we can't expect them to have the ability to drive necessarily to that mode of transportation, whether subway, commuter rail, ferry, you name it. So I think solving that last piece, which isn't the most expensive piece, certainly we saw some creative things done, with some of the opera funds in Salem, just north of Lynn. They had the Salem Skipper that was very popular, but municipalities, I don't think we can expect them to fund these programs. So I think I'm excited to see how the commission plays out, whether, and what recommendations we could use to implement this statewide.
We always want to know how the commissions, we end up being chairing them. So, we'll find out, I guess, in real
Staff loves.
Yeah, the staff does love the commissions.
So let's open it up to some questions if anybody has them. I'll start with you over here. If you could just say your name and where you're representing.
My name's Ted Canova. I run my own podcast production company, Shaping Culture. So knowing that the independent experts report that we need billions to sustain the T's improvement over the next several years or decades, right? That's always been the recommendation, billions. Do you think that the Western Mass lawmakers are going to get tired of continuing to fund inner city T budgets? And how many culverts are you going to have to pay for Western Mass in order to get T funding sustained?
Well, I'll answer the culvert piece. There's probably over 20,000 culverts, mostly in rural Massachusetts. And we, in the Chapter 90 bill, put $200 million into that. Moreover, there's another piece to that there's a pending environmental bond bill, which has a number of provisions on infrastructure. And so one thing I think that the Healy administration had talked about was the fact that we want to be able to expedite this sort of construction renovation of a lot of these culverts, which you got to realize with these culverts, letting the water flow through with a safe area to drive to be able to drive over. Communities in rural communities can be isolated with washouts, and we're only seeing these changes in climate over the last 15 to 20 years. And you'll see in our transportation work, as well as in the bond bill, a lot of efforts towards that infrastructure and being climate resilient. To your point, I think one piece of this is the senator had mentioned before that I believe under ARPA there were a number of pilot programs on microtransit that worked pretty well and efficient in rural communities. And I think what we wanted to put forward is real guidelines that we can move forward with. But I guess you're right. But I will say this, not being from Boston, as goes Boston, as goes the Commonwealth economically.
So yeah, I agree with the chair there. I mean, and I say this, I've had this conversation with many of my colleagues out in Western Mass. Obviously the success of Boston is not dependent, but our transportation infrastructure here has a great impact on how successful we can be in Boston. And certainly the Commonwealth success, while again not dependent, relies heavily on the economic impacts that we see here in Boston. So I kind of debunk the argument that investments made in our T system here don't impact folks in Central Mass and Western Mass and aren't served by the T. That said, when we're looking at that $1 billion gap or whatever the gap may be, and we're asking folks to contribute, I'm not saying we're asking folks to contribute more, just to be clear. If we're looking for greater revenue or modernizing our revenue system, I think we need to do it in a thoughtful way that isn't based around just closing the T's gap. It's about looking at what we want as a statewide transportation, system. And we've made progress for East West Rail, certainly for the RTA. Free RTA, like we've made investments. I think a credit to the legislators in their constituencies who have really raised their voice. Regional equity is something you hear all the time now, and you see it in action. So I don't think we could get the votes to pass something moving forward that doesn't recognize that equity, but also it's the right thing to do. And I think in the future, you're going to see a much better and more connected system. But it's going to be challenging. This is hard. We've been talking about this for, many people in this room, maybe more than decades, right? And it's been something that has not been solved, obviously, progress here and there, but I think we'll have to roll up our sleeves. I'll be honest too, affordability right now in the Commonwealth is, the number one issue on people's minds for a wide range of reasons. So it's going to be a very difficult conversation, even if we're not talking about raising revenues, to have a revenue conversation, in particular with the fair share, tax being implemented as well. And ballot questions now that are going out that will take billions of dollars out of our, budget every year as well. So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I think highlighting how transportation connects to all the things that we care about statewide will help win the day.
You know what's interesting? I'm going to just say this is the fact that I've been in the legislators in my 9th term. And I recall I was on the revenue committee when we passed the millionaire's tax at the time. And an organization sent attack mailers out on me, and they said I'm part of the dirty dozen in the committee. And I actually have it framed on my wall. It looks great. People thought I was in a play, right? I wasn't in a play. And it was part of the members of the committee that voted for that. And, you know, I think post-pandemic and to where we are now, folks understand the investments that had to be met, and folks understand it's going to take resources and know-how in order to have a world-class system and to have, you know, where we are Massachusetts, we lead the nation in so many things. And we also have the oldest transportation system. So we need to invest in that. And I really feel like in housing and in transportation and a number of other spaces that we really thought long and hard about sort of a reset on things and investing in things. And I see that momentum continue.
Great. Hi, Rebecca Davis from the Mass Competitive Partnership. I'm glad we got to Culvert. Jim and I sat on the Transportation Finance Task Force, and we spent many days actually talking about Culvert. So you both share kind of an interesting background, you know, besides being Senate staffers, which maybe is the most important.
With you, by the way.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right.
And others in the
Yeah.
room. There's a good alumni cohort here. But you both also were chairs of the Housing Committee. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that experience has impacted your kind of new role now as chairs of the Transportation Committee, and really how you think about that linkage between housing and the affordability crisis that we've been talking about and the transportation system.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, well, certainly I think, you know, we look at all the sort of modes of our housing system and what we wanted to see in the future. We invested $5 billion. We invested $2 billion in our public housing authorities, but we also looked at building back better and building back more sustainable with heat pumps and sustainable infrastructure. This is infrastructure that hasn't been touched in, 60 years, 55 to 60 years. And I think in transportation is very similar as well. It's sort of a holistic view on what needs to be done, taking in consideration so many factors. But I really do, my experience, I think, in housing, especially in the Affordable Homes Act, really understood that we're all in this together, right? This is not just, individuals that have a place to call home and have, a house that's worth $1 million. It's really about sort of shared, sort of a shared vision on where we want Massachusetts to go. And I think so often when I was chairing that committee, I would always hear from some people all the time, like we lead the nation in eds and meds. We lead the nation in biotech. We lead the nation in so many categories. Education, we have the most colleges of anywhere in the world. And why aren't we leading in housing and in transportation? And I think that's our direction. I think we want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been two wonderful committees to work on and definitely just so connected. So, on the MBTA Communities Act, certainly you can see the connection there just by the title alone. Shout out to Senator Boncourt. I don't want to get you in trouble in Winthrop, but Joe teed it up for us in the Senate. We were able to pass that, but obviously we need to do a lot more. Not to get into too many particulars, you just look at, if we all agree, production is one of the main drivers for the high cost of rent and home ownership in the Commonwealth. What can we do to make it easier to produce? And, some things, a lot of local zoning, obviously, we would like to, consider other ways to encourage communities to zone for multifamily, even outside of the MBTA region, but also looking at parking requirements, certain permitting reforms, those types of things, some connected to transportation, some not. And obviously just utilizing that transit-oriented development for a community, it could really just, generate so much economic opportunity for jobs, for growth. And I think working with those communities, whether through HDIP or other programs that are really kind of centered around that access to transit, could really help us start to make greater progress.
We've got a question. We've got two over there, but before, I just wanted to check online and see if we have anything. Okay. All right.
How are you? Jen Benson, ARP Massachusetts. Thank you so much for this forum. This has been great. One of the things I wanted to bring up is physical staff first. So we now have more people in Massachusetts over the age of 60 than under the age of 18. And that is just, what we're hearing. Oh, you can't hear me.
I'm closer, Jim.
All right, now you can hear me. So, to my former colleague.
That working?
You can ask it over.
Yeah, we can hear you.
What I'm hearing from around the state is that transportation is particularly difficult for our aging community who are giving up their license, at the right time for them, and they can't get to their healthcare appointments because they may live under one RTA and their healthcare is in a different RTA, and they can't cross those lines. They don't have an option like the ride, and they really need that door-to-door service. And we're hearing this more and more from councils on aging and others throughout the state. So I'm wondering, as you are looking forward to the important work that you're doing over the next year and into the next session, this population has very specific needs. And not only does access to healthcare means it's important, but it also means that they are staying on top of their healthcare needs, which actually drives down the cost of healthcare overall for everybody. So this in particular has really risen to the surface as a critical need.
Well, it's good. Hi, Jen. This is my classmate, class of 2009, state representatives. Good to see you. That's a great point. And I think there's a lot of what we talked about today about regional transit authorities, about investing in them properly to have that sort of option, the non-traditional transportation opportunities that people have or people that are not driving cars. I think when we talk about microtransit issues, which I had spoken of earlier, and I made that example about Dunstable, Massachusetts, which is, 45 miles technically from here. And that's a rural community. And I think that I know that the Microtransit Commission will be having conversations about that as well, to the point you made. And that's about sort of on-demand service that would be available. In the past, I think it was more pilot programs. And I think what we want to do is figure out real guidelines that we can invest in so we can have more interconnectivity across the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Jen. Also, not a classmate of mine, but it was great serving with you. And thanks for the question. I'm sure there's a bigger structural way that we could solve this. I would say that for particular legislators have come to us on this to try to just solve it on a case-by-case basis. So I'll open the door to that, but also recognizing that I think we need to take a deeper dive. Look forward to working with you and your organization on this.
Thank you. One of the founders of the Mass Mobility Hub. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about the role of the innovation economy and, in particular, disruptive or emerging technologies as it relates to transportation. You mentioned a bunch already, whether it's microtransit or micromobility services. We have yet to talk about automated vehicles, which I'm curious what's on your mind. And my question is more, how do you think about these potentially really disruptive technologies and the role that they can play in accelerating some of our transportation problems? I know here we have many companies that might be here in this room that are invested deeply in not only commercializing some of those technologies here in Massachusetts, but across the globe. How do you think about the role that we play in Massachusetts as cultivating innovation and ways in which we can apply those technologies here to solve some of our very problems? Are you an optimist, a pessimist, a skeptic? Say more. Thank you.
Well, I would say it's all hands on deck, right? We use our resources, our stakeholders, our people that are doing the work. Oh, it's off. People that are doing the work every day. Certainly, I think we talked a little bit about the micromobility issue, and you look another sort of pandemic issue, right? Post-pandemic, I don't think we ever really thought we would see as many of these sort of vehicles that are around. People are kind of relying on them to get around, whether it's the food industry, whether it's individuals on e-bikes, or even these like hoverboards, et cetera. There's a lot of new technologies, and I think a lot of that is just the way things have changed and evolved post-pandemic and how people really want to get around. And sort of in a lot of these other ways is this sort of feeling of being able to have guidelines on this as we move forward. I mean, certainly we'll need your assist when it comes to the I don't know why I'm holding this. You hold it. Yeah. When it comes to you know, the automated vehicles, I think most of us, when we look at it, we've had these issues come before our committee. We're always thinking and balancing the labor sort of issue here, the infrastructure issue, and taking in more information, because we understand that it's not necessarily something that's never going to come here. We understand that, but we also understand that we want to get our arms around it and do the best job for the Commonwealth and ensure that people are safe and ensure that we balance all these needs with the labor market and the infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not the most bold answer, but finding that balance, you know, is crucial. When you think of traffic congestion, when you think of safety, when you think of our workforce, all of that, like it's challenging. You don't want to fall behind, and you want to respect the tremendous infrastructure we have here within our higher, you know, institutions of higher education, within our innovation economy, with just such, you know, so much talent here and so much potential as an economic driver as well. But also recognizing at the end of the day, what is our goal is for people to safely and efficiently get where they need to go, and to make sure that these technologies are disrupting the things we want them to disrupt and not potentially having unintended consequences. So at the risk of giving a non-answer, it's exciting. I'm a pessimist, skeptic, and optimistic all at the same time. Thanks.
Acknowledged it was a non-answer.
We've been in some debates before, right? We've been around the block.
All right, we've got one online.
Questions from the audience. So this will be our last one before we wrap up. Some experts warn that the MBTA, as things stand, will struggle to stave off another fiscal cliff in the coming years, even with assistance of fair share revenues. With other funding streams, what other funding streams, congestion pricing, tweaks to R&B fees or tolls, other taxes, do the legislators think are especially promising?
I mean, I think, as I said earlier, everything needs to be on the table, and it's finding the balance, I think, in recognizing, again, the regional equity piece, also, you know, showing what we're going to get out of this is the hardest part. I would say that we shouldn't be shy about talking about this stuff. I know people sometimes get assailed for, you know, saying the phrase congestion pricing. Like we shouldn't be scared to have these conversations. Recognize, I mean, even getting a pilot done for congestion pricing has been near impossible. So we're not saying we're pursuing that just by looking at it, right? I think there are more. There's a great need to modernize our sources of funding for transportation. And I think everyone can agree on that. So if we start at that point there, then you get to the next part, which is, you know, what are those options and what best suits the needs, the workforce, the budgets of residents across the Commonwealth.
Actually, what I kind of wanted to say too, to jump off that, is I do feel that in my time in office and my time at the State House, which is 29 years, which is it's pretty crazy. In all that time, I've never been at a state of the state where the governor gave a shout out to the MBTA general manager, and the applause was higher than anyone else in there, except for Jim Rooney, of course. But I think that the legislature and the governor and stakeholders and business leaders have confidence in the Phil Eng administration now as the secretary and what he's done in the transportation, specifically in the MBTA. And I think there is that confidence that we wanted to invest to get the T off the fiscal cliff, to move forward with those recommendations, because we have confidence in his work.
Let's end on the round of applause for Chairman Eng. Thank you both.
Applause for Senator Crighton, Representative Arciero, and Carolyn Ryan. So a couple of observations. One is that there are long-term funding and financing issues that we're all going to have to confront together. But, you know, sometimes you just have to play the long game. It's tough to sometimes focus on the future of funding for transportation when there's so much right in front of you that has to be dealt with, but you got to have the agility to do both. I think today's conversation just reinforced the point I made at the beginning, which is how deeply personal transportation is. We talked about the aging population. We talked about people needing to, do drop off and pick up and get to sports and so forth, get to work and do all of those things, get to hospital appointments. At the end of the day, we talk about systems, big dollars, but at the end of the day, as I said, this is such a deeply personal issue that affects the quality of life and the economic circumstances here in Massachusetts. And I'm just proud that the Chamber's been able to work with the chairs in such a productive way to move the dial. I said during this series that I will mark 2024 is the year that transportation in Massachusetts turned the corner. I may be long gone when that history is written, but I truly believe that that with not only the attention to funding and for some of the moves that have been made in the legislature and by the administration, that's the road we're on. So, but a lot of it has to do with your continued advocacy and engagement in the subject matter and letting people know that it is important to all of us. So on that note, this is the end of this transportation first series for 2026. I once again want to thank State Street, Carolyn and Ron O'Hanley for their generous support of this series. We're evaluating our programming for next year and we'll see sort of where we go. It's been incredibly popular, a series. So we'll see what we do for next year. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us, and to you and your families, a safe and happy Thanksgiving holiday.